That is going to need to be set aside for all impacts that may result as the tariff, and that's as it's been built in.
The beef and cattle industry is bracing for the blow of U.S. tariff.
New this morning, we are getting a new look at prices at the grocery store. July Consumer Price Index shows inflation for food prices over the past month. That's steady, but over the past year, that number is 2.9%.
It started quietly, almost like a footnote in the morning headlines, but by the time the dust settled, it had shaken the global food industry to its core. Ontario, a province not usually thought of as the epicenter of international drama, made one decision that flipped the U.S. beef market upside down. Overnight, what looked like a routine policy choice snowballed into a worldwide crisis, leaving American producers scrambling and foreign buyers rushing to secure new suppliers. What Ontario did was bold, some would say shocking. Officials there didn't just question U.S. beef imports, they shut the door entirely. 150,000 tons of American beef, the kind that was supposed to roll straight into Canadian supermarkets and restaurants, was instead stopped cold at the border. The message wasn't hidden in red tape or quiet memos. It was loud, clear, and deliberate. And if you thought that decision was going to stay inside Canada's borders, think again. Because here's where the story takes a sharp twist. Within hours, other nations followed Ontario's lead like dominoes toppling in sequence. Germany, Japan, and even Middle Eastern markets, some of the most lucrative destinations for premium beef, all announced similar rejections. What could have been dismissed as a local dispute quickly escalated into an international blockade. The U.S. beef industry didn't just lose customers, it lost credibility. Back in America, the fallout was immediate. Processing plants in Nebraska and Texas suddenly froze export orders. Containers already stacked on cargo ships were redirected mid-route. Warehouse inventories began to back up like clogged highways. And consumers? They felt it in the most painful place, the grocery store. Prices for ground beef jumped nearly $2 a pound in a matter of days. Bacon began brushing against the $10 mark. And supermarkets, already under pressure from inflation, warned shoppers to brace for another spike before Labor Day. One decision from Ontario had created shockwaves that landed straight onto American dinner tables. But while U.S. suppliers were reeling, Canadian producers moved with the precision of chess grandmasters. It wasn't hesitation. It wasn't panic. It was preparation. Contracts with Asian buyers worth billions were signed before many American exporters even had a chance to read the headlines. In Tokyo's exclusive Ginza restaurants and Seoul's upscale districts, menus shifted almost overnight. Out went U.S. prime cuts, in came hormone-free Canadian beef. Chefs weren't just swapping products, they were marketing the switch as an upgrade, boasting about cleaner flavor and stricter safety standards. In a marketplace where reputation is everything, Canada's beef was suddenly the star attraction. And here's the brutal truth. The official reasons Ontario gave for rejecting U.S. beef made that shift almost impossible to fight against. Hormone use, unclear labeling, and traceability problems. 3 phrases that make consumers pause before pulling a package off the shelf. Once those concerns hit global media, the narrative wasn't about tariffs or politics anymore. It was about safety, trust, quality. And in that conversation, Canada had the upper hand. Polling inside the United States revealed something even more unsettling. A majority of Americans were already stressed about food costs, and once stories began circulating about international buyers ditching U.S. beef, consumers at home started questioning labels in their own stores. Social media filled with people posting pictures of meat packages, scanning QR codes, and demanding answers about what was really inside. The erosion of trust wasn't just happening overseas, it was happening inside the U.S. itself. Meanwhile, Japan, a country that had resisted Canadian processed beef for nearly 2 decades, suddenly swung the doors wide open in 2023. By the following year, Canadian beef exports to Japan had surged over 13%, a growth spurt big enough to make executives in boardrooms start polishing victory speeches. In China, the blow to U.S. beef was even harsher. A 125% tariff turned an ordinary steak into a luxury item overnight. Restaurants that once prided themselves on American brisket began quietly replacing it with Canadian cuts. And the irony? Diners loved it. What was once dismissed as second best was now marketed as premium. The economic impact rippled out far beyond steak and burgers. American corn and soybean farmers, long dependent on livestock feed demand from beef exports, suddenly found themselves staring at silos overflowing with unsold crops. Entire freight trains of soybeans were left without buyers. Billions of dollars in projected value vanished from spreadsheets almost instantly. What had been expected to be a profitable year for farmers turned into one of the bleakest in recent memory. Think about that chain reaction for a moment. Ontario blocks U.S. beef. Other countries follow. American exports collapse. Grocery prices spike. Farmers lose soybean and corn markets. The entire agricultural ecosystem, from ranchers to grain producers, is pulled into a downward spiral. What began as one provincial decision turned into a nationwide agricultural storm. And while the U.S. was trying to catch its breath, Canada executed what can only be described as a masterclass in market takeover. The government didn't just sit back and let producers handle it alone. They rolled out a $6.5 billion package designed not as bailout money, but as fuel for expansion. Cold storage facilities, refrigerated transport, and direct shipping routes to Asia were all part of the plan. Contracts were signed for years in advance, meaning Canada had secured not just a temporary boost, but long-term loyalty from some of the most demanding markets in the world. Picture it. While U.S. exporters were stuck with warehouses full of unsold beef, Canadian suppliers were loading containers onto ships headed directly from Winnipeg to Asian ports. No U.S. border crossings, no American customs delays, just straight supply lines connecting Canadian ranches to global dinner tables. In markets like Tokyo and Seoul, the Canadian maple leaf logo began to carry the same prestige as luxury fashion brands. Clean, traceable, and reliable. That was the pitch, and international buyers were buying it. The irony in all of this is hard to ignore. For decades, U.S. beef was considered the gold standard worldwide. It was marketed as premium, top quality, unbeatable. Now, in less than 2 years, that reputation has been dented, maybe even permanently. Because in global trade, reputation isn't something you can rebuild easily. Once buyers decide your product is risky, it takes years of flawless performance to win them back. Canada understood this, and that's why they moved so aggressively to lock in contracts and cement their new position. Inside the United States, the consequences keep piling up. Meat prices remain volatile, farmers are anxious about collapsing feed demand, and ranchers are warning that herd sizes are at historic lows. Consumers are paying more at the grocery store, questioning labels, and in some cases, even avoiding U.S. beef altogether. The ripple effects touch every corner of the food economy. What started as a single policy move in Ontario has become a full-scale restructuring of global beef trade. And the part that stings the most? This isn't looking like a temporary storm. The contracts Canada has signed, the infrastructure investments they're making, the reputation they've secured, all of it points to a long-term shift. Once Asian and European buyers build trust in Canadian suppliers, there's little incentive for them to return to the U.S. Why risk uncertainty when you have reliability? Why gamble on controversy when you can offer your customers safety and traceability with confidence? In many ways, this isn't just about beef. It's about how global markets can pivot overnight when consumers demand better standards and when governments act quickly to supply them. It's a story about how one nation's hesitation can become another nation's opportunity. And for American agriculture, it's a warning shot that relying on reputation alone isn't enough anymore. So as grocery bills climb higher, as ranchers wrestle with shrinking markets, and as Canadian suppliers toast their success with billion-dollar deals, the lesson is clear. Global trade is ruthless. One bold move can change everything. And in this case, Ontario's decision didn't just shut the door on U.S. beef. It opened the gates for Canada to step onto the world stage as the new powerhouse of premium meat. What happens next is the question everyone's asking. Will the U.S. make adjustments, clean up its labeling, and fight to win back markets? Or will this become the moment historians point to as the turning point where America lost its beef crown for good? For now, the knives have been sharpened, the contracts signed, and the plates in Tokyo, Berlin, and Dubai are stacked with Canadian cuts. The message is clear. The world has a new supplier they trust. All individuals, companies, and nations discussed in this report are described based on publicly available information. Allegations, market claims, and statements are reported as described in global media. All individuals and organizations are presumed lawful and legitimate unless proven otherwise in the appropriate legal context.